so much. We have all kinds of things wired up here, so we're hoping not to have a bunch of feedback. I had so many mics on me, I could hardly move. So thanks for having me. Wendy, thanks for all your careful planning and endless emails and at different times of day and night, for sure. We really appreciate you getting this all together, and all of you in the audience, some of whom I met in the clinics. It was so nice to be able to visit with you and to interact with your children who have changed my life, obviously, in many ways. So appreciate you sharing your children with me and allowing me to poke and prod and come up with some strategies that might be helpful in the future. So today we're going to look at some of those things that might help us in the daily living strategies that we have with these individuals. And we know that oftentimes it's very frustrating. It's quite a challenge, isn't it, to know what to do and how to do it. So I'm hopeful that what I share with you today is going to bring some answers to some of those frustrating times, and also just kind of let you know this is kind of daily living with these guys, and it's not because you're a bad mother or father or a grandmother or a relative. It's because they are challenging, and there's a real neurobiological basis to some of the things and behaviors that your children present. So we're going to go forward with this, and hopefully everything will work. Just want to kind of share with you, this is why things get kind of crazy with your kids. And there's some things that they really have difficulty tolerating that affect daily living. And so again, you're gonna look at that environment. We talked a lot about that yesterday in the clinics. What is that environment like? Is it noisy? Is it chaotic? You know that when your child sort of balks and won't go into a certain area because it's too noisy or there's too many people there, that's a good sign, isn't it? They're telling you with their body, with their behavior, this is not going to work for me. And even though it seems maladaptive, we have to pay attention to that because that's the only way they know to communicate what they need at that point. So our job is to take that in and to realize, okay, what do I need to do to structure this differently if I really want to take my child to a basketball game or to an event that's very, very noisy? What am I going to have to do in the future in order to make this work? We also know the sensory integration, which kind of then spills into that noisy, chaotic environment. They have trouble interpreting what comes into their sensory system. That hyperarousal, that heightened anxiety related to, this feels really scary to me, or when you touch me lightly, I don't interpret that well, and I don't want anything to do with that. Or covering ears and biting hands when something is very noisy. We also know that, sometimes they get anxious, and sometimes they're sick. I think we forget that. These guys get sick too. They have sore throats and colds and those kinds of things, and they really can't tell you ahead of time that that's coming. Your typically developing kid may say the night before, you know, Mom, my throat's kind of scratchy, it's kind of sore. I think maybe I'm gonna be sick tomorrow, or I might be sick right now. The kid with Fragile X is not gonna give you that kind of an indication, and as a matter of fact, sometimes they have such a high pain tolerance that they don't know that they're hurting until it's kind of too late. They're into it full blown. So again, remember, they do get sick. They may have a stomach problem. They may have, some cold coming on. Those are things that are real to this population as well. And people already have talked about, and I'm looking forward to hearing our speechee later on, talk to us about the communication delays. We know with these kids, so much of the time, they communicate through their behavior, don't they? And even though they talk and they have great verbal skills at times, or they can imitate, they really do not give us a clue about what's really going on with them sometimes. And so they have to show us through their behavior. So again, that's another thing that happens. We have that communication delay. It's really important for you to understand that a lot of times they're communicating through their behavior. And then just the family dynamics that get in the way. Some of you that have typically developing kids, those of you that have family, extended members, cousins that are affected with Fragile X, when you all get together, things get kind of crazy. One child can tolerate one thing, another can tolerate another. We have in-laws, ex-laws, all kinds of things going on that are going to give you lots of feedback and lots of help in terms of parenting and raising your child. So putting that all together, and here hearing from siblings that are typically developing saying things like, the kid, my brother with Fragile X, always gets his way. We're running around all the time trying to get him to therapies, and so I can't join this club, or mom can't take me here because she has to do the therapy. Those are the things that people say, and you have to deal with that in addition to your child who has Fragile X syndrome. So again, I think any of this kind of coming together can be the perfect storm for a lot of frustration, and I'm here to tell you about ways that I think we can make that easier for you. Some of the developmental delays that we've spoken about tend to sort of go on and on forever, don't they? And some of you even have children that may be in their teens that aren't completely toilet trained or have accidents, and that's again something to do with this condition. And we really know that that does get debilitating. I mean, when you're getting ready to go and you have to take a bathroom break and you have to change a diaper, or you have to change a pull-up or something like that, it really does get in the way of the daily living. So we do know that causes some problems. Sometimes they sort of have this aversion to certain foods, and they gag at times just because of the sensory sensation. And so going down, they're going to gag on that food. And so what that does is it kind of changes their perspective about a banana, let's say. They gag on a banana, they're never going to touch a banana again, right? And that's really hard then to reintroduce that food, because they get superstitious about some of the things that they believe are true. I tell the story about going to a Mexican restaurant with a guy with Fragile X, and just so happened he was coming down with stomach flu, had nothing to do with the restaurant, but every time we drive by that restaurant now, he will never go in because it makes me sick, got sick there, not gonna go again. So again, doesn't matter, you're not gonna talk him into changing that behavior. Also, just paying attention to things that maybe aren't even important, and they kind of get stuck. That's the stimulus over selectivity. That's a trait that we see in kids on the spectrum as well. And it kind of gets them centralized on one thing, and they perseverate on that over and over again. And you can't quite get them off that to jump ship and go talk about something else. So again, very selective. We know that they have focus, concentration issues. So when you're trying to get them ready in the morning, get ready to go to school, and you're getting organized, and let's get our shoes on. Okay, now let's get our backpack. Let's make sure we have our lunch. Those are the things that sort of get lost, and all of a sudden they're somewhere else doing something, and you're wondering, where are they? The bus is here. You know, those kinds of things. So again, that's tough. Motor delays, we talked about that just in terms of getting your funding. And I kind of had an idea about that too. I wonder if it wouldn't be good to tie in some of those things that your child may have trouble with, because low muscle tone is something that we see in Fragile X. It's researched over and over again. So again, bringing it back to Fragile X syndrome, making that the disorder and saying, because of that, my child has low muscle tone. Because of that, he has less stamina to stay on his feet and walk. Those are the things maybe would be helpful. Don't know, but we're throwing it in there from an American who doesn't know the system. So anyway, these are all the things that sort of get in the way. The eating, we know, again, gagging on certain foods, but also just not being able to tolerate certain textures and sort of being stuck on carbs and certain things, so that you're cooking one meal for your child with Fragile X, everybody else gets a different meal. That does affect daily living, doesn't it? And that's difficult, because as a mom, a dad, you want your child to eat. You feel like they need that nutrition. And yet sometimes to get them to eat, you have to sort of give in to what they like. And then you're wondering, is it really nutritional or not? Am I just providing lots of carbohydrates? And that's not really helpful. So again, those are the things I think that all of us understand get in the way. So let's take these apart, and let's start looking at strategies to kind of help this through. Hopefully, this will be helpful to you if we're looking at these problems to kind of rectify them. So again, these are no-brainers. Everybody knows this, but I think it's good to review it, because we sort of lapse into some habits that maybe aren't real consistent in terms of bedtime. Making it really a consistent bedtime and having that always there for your child. Those visual schedules, even though your child, I hear this all the time, really he knows all about these schedules. He's internalized it. But I really think it's important to have that visual picture so that they can go back to that. When they get anxious, they sort of forget some things and they get disorganized internally. So I think having those visual schedules, it's bedtime, okay, and it's a certain time, and maybe you show the clock, maybe you show something that's digital, and all of a sudden they know, okay, now we're going to have this drop down of here's my routine. So again, you're going to have a bedtime routine, which basically may involve a social story. And the social story may be about your child. It may be about what happened that day, and you can do something very easily on a whiteboard and go over it with them, because sometimes they tend to ruminate things that happened during the day, which causes sleep disorders. They may also be anticipating something coming up. And so you can talk about that and say, you know, tomorrow you're having a field trip to the pumpkin patch, and we're going to go, and I'm going with you, and we're going to pick out a pumpkin. Just those kinds of things that kind of tell them what's going on in a contextual format. We found that giving information to your children in context is much more viable, is much more meaningful for them. So again, telling it in a story form is better than just saying, kind of like a checklist. So tomorrow we're going to do this, we're going to get up, we're going to get ready for the pumpkin patch, we're going to take our coat and our lunch in, and mom's going to take you to school because I'm driving, whatever it is. So you can kind of get them ready for that. There needs to be a quiet room where they sleep, and that's basically their bedroom. I talk about this a lot. Don't have them sleeping with you. And I know that's hard, because when they don't sleep and you need to get a night's rest because you're going to work the next day, the easiest thing is just grab them up and take them into your room. And this also is the same for typically developing kids. But what happens with this is that then they become dependent on that. We have that separation anxiety piece, and it gets harder and harder to separate away from mom and dad's bedroom. And so again, just something to think about, and to really practice when you have a break, when there's a time where you know that it's going to be possible to work on this. I really would suggest that, and it will mean that you start in the bedroom, your child's bedroom, and he's going to come into yours and you're going to bring him back, and he's going to come into yours and you're going to bring him back. So it's that constant repetition of changing that routine. Sometimes we use a night light because that sort of helps. We know that at night there's this real separation piece kicking in. The anxiety is there because everything shuts down, nobody's doing anything, and the child is sort of on their own, right? And then that's really hard for them. They get sort of frightened about those things. And so we want to make sure that we make it as comfortable as possible in that particular, I'm going to move this because I think that may be getting in the way. In that particular situation, if there's a light, then we know that they might be a little bit more able to focus on sleeping and not being so anxious. We have those lights, and I'm sure you have them here too. They're sort of dimmers, and as the time ticks off, they get dimmer and dimmer, and in the morning then you can set a time, and it kind of is this nice awakening that sort of starts the light going gradually in the morning. So it's a nice way to wake up, certainly better than an alarm. Sometimes we use music that turns off at a certain time. Sometimes we might use a sound machine that has favorite sounds going. And sometimes we even record mom's voice or dad's voice reading a bedtime story, and that kind of helps break that, transition back into the bedroom if they can hear mom's voice. But it's really, really important to try these strategies and to start to get your child sleeping, because we know if people don't sleep, including you, we're crabby, we're not really very cognitively able to handle what we have the next day. It really affects our cognition and our thinking and our problem solving. And so again, think of your child in the same way, that he needs as much sleep that's uninterrupted as possible. Toileting, really a hard one. And we do know with the low muscle tone, the sphincter muscle in the buttocks sometimes doesn't develop till later. If there's a runny stool, that makes it even harder because it's not closing up and sort of just leaks out, making it really hard to do the toilet training. So again, just to let you know, that's something that's very common. I would try it for a 3-day period if you think your child is ready, not you, but your child, by knowing these things. If your child is not wanting to be wet any longer or brings you the pull-up when it's wet, if your child kind of goes somewhere else to go to the bathroom but not in the bathroom, he's figuring out there's something going on with my body and I need to be private or I need to be somewhere else to do this. Those are good signs that your child is starting to develop the ability to understand that their body needs to urinate, their body needs to defecate. So again, I think that's something that we would want to sort of look at ahead of time. And then start on a 3-day trial. So if you have a long weekend, it's going to be the kind of thing where you're taking them in increments of 15, 30 minutes max. You want to catch them wetting on the toilet. That's just so important. And again, remember, these guys are the guys that if you give them too much attention, they get hyper aroused. So if, yay, good, good, they're going to think that's an aversive experience. So you don't want to get too crazy in the bathroom with them if you do in fact get a positive, because then it's going to make that experience very negative. But if you can just be very calm and say, congratulations, this is so cool. Maybe you have a special lolly that only is used for that particular event. That's reinforced. Up and at him, and he's ready to go again. Next time, 15 minutes after he leaves the bathroom, you try it all over again. It really is something that you have to dedicate a long weekend to, nothing else going on, and you have to see whether or not you can catch them in the act. That's the point, because then he's going to make the connection, right? It's really hard for him to do that unless he actually urinates in the toilet. So again, making that happen. I think it's just something that you're going to have to dedicate. The first trial is the 3-day trial. If you get some success, then I think you're going to have to say, okay, I'm going to continue this for about 10 days. We know that any habit can pretty well be established in that amount of time. And so again, you're going to want to do that over a time period where you have a break. It's going to have to take that kind of dedication. The reason it's important, if they're ready, is that it opens lots of doors to them, to other places, to daycare. If they're older, they're going to be more viable in terms of hiring them. It's really an important skill. So it does in fact open the doors to them to other opportunities and experiences. Socially, it's a big deal. So if he's the kid in the classroom with typically developing peers, and he's the one that always has to go out for the diaper break, or he's the one that wears the pull-ups, or he's the one that smells. It's not a good one. It's not good for integration. It's not good for acceptance. So again, just another reason to really, motivate yourself to get this done. There could be physiological issues that you certainly want to get checked out ahead of time with your physician. And there are medications that can help. I think Jonathan talked about imipramine, some of those medications that we often use for enuresis. Those are things to check out. So if your child is older, you've done this, you've really tried, go see the physician and let them know what you have trialed and what the results have been. And there may be something physiologically that needs to be checked out as well. So now we're going to look at eating. Tough one as well. I tell the story about an individual at a school that was sitting at a table all by himself during the lunchtime, and I went to the other children and I said, why is he eating alone? He's a great guy. I really like him. It's a lot of fun. Oh yeah, Dr. Braden, we agree with you, but have you looked at his glasses? And I was like, well, let me go look. So his glasses had food all over them because he'd had his hands in his mouth and he was doing something with his glasses while he was chewing, and the food had come out, and I understand that's pretty gross. So again, those food eating things, again, it's just making them more social. We know oftentimes that that's a poor receptor. Your mouth is very poor receptor, and so putting hands while you chew in your mouth, you see your boys doing this oftentimes, that gives another place for them to sort of figure out what's in my mouth. We also know the stuffing is due to the sensory piece because they don't feel that their mouth has anything in it unless it's really full of food. And that gives that feedback to them that I have food in my mouth. Sort of like the light touch is something that's really hard for them to tolerate, but when you compress and give co-contraction to their joints, they feel that and like that. So again, it's that sensory piece of giving lots of feedback is what they can interpret. Also, make sure they don't have food allergies. This is really important because if you're really trying to get them to eat certain things, they continue to get sick on them. We know that they may have an allergy, celiac, something else going on. So again, these are some strategies. What I usually do is tell parents, we're going to take little bites, and it's only for part of the meal. You can't do this the entire meal because he's going to get really tired of this. But Small bite, hands down, chew, swallow. Small bite, hands down, chew, swallow. So maybe you want to do 5 of those, and then you let him go ahead and feed himself the rest of the meal. If you start this process, you're going to see, and you have to do it consistently, you're going to see that he starts, in fact, to sort of put his hands down, or he may even say, small bite, hands down. He really will. And if he starts doing that, then you know he's ready to really do it on his own, and you can praise him for that and say, yeah, let's take a few more bites. In terms of eating, again, introduce new foods gradually. So again, maybe just a little piece, and then he can have other things that he really likes. They like crunchy. We know why. Jonathan talked about how we sort of had a paradoxical relationship with Prozac. For sure, chewing, eating, those kinds of things are very nurturing, are very calming. And that's why they chew on things, they chew on their hands, they chew on their clothes. So they like crunchy foods in order to calm themselves. And they've just learned that through experience. And so again, trying to eat something that's good for you, that's crunchy, is problematic, but that's something that I would invite you to try. So a carrot or something that does give that same feedback as a chip. And again, that's tough because a chip to them is going to taste a heck of a lot better than a carrot. But again, just introducing maybe something that's a little more crunchy is a way to go. So a couple of those no thank you bites, and then you go back to what he will eat. And that's really important to introduce. Pacing, like I said, small portions, and take it really slow, hands down, chew and swallow. They have a tendency to stuff and swallow fast, and they do gag, and oftentimes that becomes a big issue for them in terms of eating. And you can even have them counting and then swallowing. Let's talk just a little bit about that anxiety piece that we had in the initial slide that sort of gave you an idea that there are some things going on physiologically with these kids. Really, really difficult for them to manage their anxiety. And it becomes just part of who they are. Living with that anxiety, as I've said so many times to parents, to me, is Herculean. It really is, to think that they get through their days living with such anxiety. And a lot of times we don't even realize what's going on with them because oftentimes their behavior and their avoidance behavior and their hiding and some of the things that we see them doing is kind of a giveaway. But there's other times where they really manage it in a way where they're very introverted, they hold it in, and in essence really what they're telling you is, I'm so scared, I'm so nervous, I'm so anxious that I can't be with you, I can't be in this environment. I'm going to run, I'm going to do the fight or flight sort of thing where I take my shoes off and throw them, or I'm going to run away from you, I'm going to do something to get out of this environment because it's just too hard to persevere. These are some guides with Fragile X that certainly are telling me that they're anxious. We see this a lot, don't we? The middle guy just looks miserable, and that's really kind of the way, that's his countenance oftentimes because of the fact that he is so incredibly anxious. This is a kind of interesting slide around those anxiety disorders and really looking at Fragile X in individuals who meet the diagnostic criteria for anxiety disorders. This is the diagnostic 4 manual. We have the 5 now, so it's a little bit old. But again, I think it's worth sharing because it really shows you the total who meet the anxiety disorder in different ways, and then also looking at just the anxiety. So the 2 down are other disorders, other things going on. But if we look at separation anxiety, if we look at social phobias and those kinds of things, you can see that there's some major issues in terms of specific phobias or panic disorders. And again, looking at the males and females, looking down, now this is a percentage of those individuals that they studied. So it's not universal, it's not general population, but it does look at GAD being general anxiety disorder. You can see there's a pretty big amount of those individuals with Fragile X that they surveyed that have anxiety disorders. So again, you can even look at the selective mutism that Jonathan talked about. That seems to be another issue. I've had it happen more with girls than boys, but I don't know. This looks like the males have a higher number here. So again, my sample may be skewed. It just goes to show you that there's some really big issues here. I have an individual with a full mutation who's agoraphobic, and I literally have now I have her at a point where her husband can bring her in for her therapy. We were doing phone therapy for a long time just because she couldn't get out of her house. So again, I would do things like she'd have her cell phone and I'd say, okay, now let's take a couple steps outside. Now I want a picture and I want you to send it to my cell phone to show me that you're outside. Because she was getting pretty clever for a while there. She was telling me she was outside and she really wasn't. So again, had to kind of double check that. But that was a big deal for her to get through that. And it's taken about 6 months. Let's talk about hyperarousal. Hyperarousal is really something you hear about often, and OTs will talk to you about that for sure. And it's really just this nervous system becoming totally overwhelmed by anything that's going on in the environment. Anything that they need to process, to make a comment, to respond to their environment. A lot of times the triggers, as you can imagine, would be sensory, social. A lot of these guys do not. They're very social. They're very good at kind of doing their own thing, but the minute you ask them to say hello to Dr. Braden, that's when they cower. Maybe they go behind mom, or they do something that's not really as social as I observed incidentally. So again, when they can control it, they seem to do fine, but when you put them on the spot, that's really difficult for them. Just any kind of processing. So if we ask them to do something that requires language or cognition of any kind, sometimes this becomes a major issue. So again, overstimulated, going from responding and just in a heightened sort of way of response, so that they kind of lose it and they really get totally disorganized and they need to get out of the situation for sure. You often will see the fear in fight or flight, for sure. You see them doing something they know they're going to get in trouble for, because then they can get out of the activity, right? So they kind of plan it out just as a strategy. So again, if you want them to do something and they hit you and you put them in a timeout, that takes them away from the activity at hand. Certainly you have to address the hitting, but you have to bring them back to help them with that. Sometimes they can wear headsets to kind of drown out the sound. Sometimes they can wear dark glasses, something that's going to allow them a little sort of support so that they can finish out and start to get desensitized to those situations. So this really causes them to feel disorganized. It's got to feel awful. It just can't be a good feeling. And I think just kind of being able to have that modulation in terms of their sensory system and being able to bring themselves back down when they're hyper-aroused makes it really difficult for them. And it decreases any chance or any shot of us teaching self-regulation. So those of you that have been to conferences and have seen Tracy Stackhouse talk about the ready, not ready sort of response pattern, where you have the ready being the green piece of paper on the table and the red being the not ready, and trying to teach regulation protocol. So what that would mean is when we saw them being disorganized, we would give them a little break and not do any interaction at all, and then ask them, ready, not ready, okay? And then we would help them touch the ready or the not ready based on how relaxed they were. In the meantime, we might do some breathing. So blow out the candle, smell the flower. Blow out the candle, smell the flower. And we literally use visuals for this so that we would know then, okay, probably they're starting to calm down. If you try to do this too early in the cycle, you will fail because they just can't get organized enough to even participate. So again, giving them that time and then introducing smelling the flower and blowing out the candle, maybe 3 of those, maybe a little bit of a squeeze, something that might be a deep relaxation exercise, and then you can say, ready. And really what you're doing is you're teaching them that, because they don't know that yet. They're not able to just magically, oh, okay, I was disorganized, now I'm ready. You see what I mean? So you're really pairing out and teaching them something that's a skill. So again, 3 times, ready, okay? And now we're on green. Now you're gonna give them a little bit of time to get organized, and you're gonna give them a real simple task, something you know they can do. That way then they can start to get more control again. So it's really hard. It's a tough protocol to teach, but something we really have to spend some time on, because if they can start regulating their response pattern, we know we're gonna have more success. Again, kind of looking at this whole hyperarousal, it is very difficult. Sometimes you can adapt the environment. Sometimes you can kind of look at what those antecedents are and kind of adapt according to that. Not always, because you can't change the world for your child. But if there are situations where you really can sort of change that antecedent piece, it's worth it, because it's easier to change the environment than the organism, for sure. So anyway, that's all part of that. This is important because your kids and you have taught me a number of things. And I think really in this whole process, what makes me an expert is that I've been alive a long time and that I've worked with these kids a long time. That's really all it is. Not a bit smarter than anybody else or anything else. I guess I'm pretty good at watching behavior and figuring it out. And you know, when we first started doing this in the 80s, Rondi had me, that's kind of how I got involved in it. Rondi Hagerman, who was in Denver, close to where I live at the time, was doing some double-blind crossover studies with folate. And that's exactly how I got in the middle of this, because she saw a report that I'd done and she wanted me to utilize a certain standardized instrument to look at the kids that she'd identified as Fragile X in Denver. And we were going to look at a pre and a post with mega doses of vitamin B. And so, folate. So what we did was we did a baseline, and then we went back to a crossover with the placebo. Unfortunately, it was not significant in terms of what we came up with at the end, but we certainly saw some really good results anecdotally in terms of behavioral changes. That's why a lot of times she'll just recommend for you to get on a folate. So I think sometimes that's a reason for that. It can't hurt, right? And it is natural. So again, when we were doing this in the first place, she sort of said, just watch these guys. You won't believe it. It's this genetic condition. And even though kids with Down syndrome kind of looked alike, and they might have had some similarities, this one was just incredibly. The kids were all the same in terms of intonation patterns, and they weren't related. And I remember being in another room getting set up, and I'm listening to the chatter in the waiting room, and I thought, well, there's a whole family out there because they all sound the same, their intonation is the same, just everything about their language patterns were the same. And I walked out, and of course they weren't related, and it was striking. It was absolutely striking to me to see that group clustering together and being so genetically connected. And yes, they came from all over the state of Colorado, and I think we even had some from other states. So again, just looking at that similarity in terms of those patterns is really why I have suggestions for you today. And I think just knowing that they've taught me a lot in terms of their behaviors. So our job is to watch the maladaptive behaviors and then interpret them in a way that says, okay, this is what I need to do to help you communicate this. The way you're doing it right now is not real cool. I'm not telling them that. That's what's in my head. So I'm going to figure out ways that you can communicate your need in a more adaptive way. Challenging to provide support for these guys because you have relationships with them. And, you know, at home, we don't have as much structure normally as we do other places. And yet this population needs that more than ever, okay? They need the structure, they need the visual schedules, they need staying on a time clock, timetable. They're the ones that get very upset when you're late, they get very upset when they're late. They know this internal clock, they want this to happen on time because it really does provoke their anxiety. They're lovable, they have a great sense of humor, but sometimes they charm the socks off of us and we give in to them too often. And sometimes we even laugh at things that are inappropriate because it just catches you off guard so quickly. Well, what you've done with that is reinforce that behavior right away, right? So you kind of have to catch yourself and say, that was funny, but I can't laugh at it the next time. And believe me, you'll get another opportunity because once you laugh at it, they're going to try that one over and over again. So again, I'm going to ignore that the next time and I'm not going to attend to it. Really hard because they are very social, they're very lovable, they're very clever. And again, we have to get them ready for the real world and independence. Okay, so crawling in between the cushions is telling me I really need some deep pressure. So, okay, we can give you a vest, we can give you some deep pressure. That's a far better way to get that need met than to be crawling in between cushions. So they also tell us what they need related to behavior. Sometimes they're disruptive, sometimes difficult to deal with in the community. And in those environments, this is hard for us as parents because they're yours. And you feel that they're your responsibility. Again, people in the community are going to look at you strange. They're going to maybe come up and say, why can't you control your child? Don't you know your child is misbehaving? Do you not discipline your child? I mean, that's going to come to you. We know that, right? I've had people come to me when I take kids with Fragile X out in the community and ask me the same question. So again, that's just the way it works. I would hope that you can insulate from that, but it is one of those things that sort of feeds your own anxiety and makes you even more upset and nervous in those environments. And then you sort of think, okay, would you stop this? Look, everybody's looking. Those are the kinds of things, just take them away. Just don't even think about it. You're going to focus on your child and you're going to help that child get through that activity. And the next time it's going to be easier and easier because you're not going to be upset with them. That's neurobiology. And a lot of times they learn how to work the system. I definitely know that. But on the other hand, when they're having a really catastrophic reaction to something in the environment, that is neurobiology. It is for sure. One of the things parents tell me oftentimes is, gosh, you know, we got all ready for this and he's done nothing but talk about it forever, and we get ready to get in the car and he has a meltdown. Why, Dr. Braden? I don't get this, right? So once again, you guys can answer the question. The hyperarousal is just overwhelming at that point, right? So all bets are off. Trying to talk through, trying to go back to the social story, trying to say, but yesterday you were so excited, and remember, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Cut the verbiage right away and just let them have that time to relax. And again, if they want to go back in the house and try it all over again and you're going to be late for your plane, I know how that feels. You do the best you can to get through that. If it's absolutely impossible, of course you have to load them up, strap them in, and take them to the airport. But again, one of those times where if there's a chance that you can back off and let them have that time to relax a bit before going forward, that hyperarousal has kicked in and they simply cannot function at that point. So I think basically if you kind of remember that there are these neurobiological underpinnings that are really important for you to pay attention to. And I think if we push on any one of these, if we ask for them, in other words, to talk to us, if we ask for them to be social and verbal at the same time, and they're getting really upset because you're really pushing at those buttons that are really hard for them that have neurobiological underpinnings, then we know they're going to respond in a maladaptive way because they're going to tell us, you're making me really mad. I can't do this. But instead of saying those words, they're going to do something like pull your hair, right? Or they're going to throw their shoes at you. Now here's the most important thing that I will say during this lecture, so I want you to really listen to this. The way you respond to that particular behavior is going to set the stage from then on out. Not to say you can't undo it, but in order to change that behavior, you must respond differently because he is a global thinker. He's hardwired to think of this whole incident as a global incident, not I did this, then mom did this, and then I get this. That's not how his brain is hardwired. His brain is hardwired, I'm feeling overwhelmed, they asked me to talk or something, I'm going to get out of this thing, I'm throwing my shoes or I'm pulling the hair, mom's going to scream and cry, and then I'm going to cry and feel bad, and it's going to be over. It's that whole cycle. It really is. The whole thing together, not each sequential piece. So now, the remedy is for you to respond differently because that will break that cycle. So he will be kind of thrown off because you're still going to have the expectation. He will probably still respond with a behavioral response, but your response back will be either a planned ignoring, maybe a calm voice, saying something like no hitting, and you're going to remove yourself, you're going to walk away, whatever it is. And it's going to get his attention. He's going to think, wait a minute, something's not quite right here. And that's your best shot at changing that behavior because he now is sort of stymied. He doesn't quite know what to do, right? You can get his attention and he doesn't have to cry. He doesn't have to go through that whole sequence because you've changed something in the middle of it. So again, just try that. I think you'll really, if you think back on behaviors that your child has, and what the antecedent is, what kind of caused the behavior to happen, and then look forward to what do I do during that time? I'm probably pretty upset if he's pulling my hair. I mean, really, that's a natural reaction. You're going to say, stop that, stop, let go. But if you can try to get yourself calmed down and just get his hands out of your hair and put them down and move away, do something different, he's going to say, sorry, mommy, or he's going to say, are you okay, mommy? It's going to go in a different direction. And then you can say, yep, let's move on. And we're going to do something else. Okay? Because you guys know what that takes. I mean, it's a long cycle sometimes when they have to go through that remorseful stuff and they're totally a mess afterwards and crying and feeling horrible. And I do believe they do feel badly, but it's all part of that cycle. Let me look at my time. Okay. I think, let's just get this one in and then we're going to take a quick little fun break. So the behavioral cycle and the responses, again, just remind yourself, how do I respond during that fight or flight? Okay? What do I do? And you guys will know your own set. And we're going to have you all talk about it in a minute. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, you know what you do. I mean, sometimes it's not pretty, and I get it. And then how do you deal? This is really critical because we've done some studies about how moms and dads feel after these sort of episodes occur. Okay? How do you feel when your child has been physically aggressive toward you or really bit you, hurt you? It's not easy because this is your kid and you love this child and you've given all that you have to this child and he's biting you. That's not easy, right? It's not easy to reconcile. So I think all this business about I carry the gene so it's all my fault, so I need to be the martyr and I'm just going to take it, you guys don't do that. We only do that in America. I know. Yeah, not over here. So you have to understand that truly this is a hurt, this is a pain for you, and you need to be able to talk about it with someone. You need to be able to regroup, you need to share it with a family member, a friend of yours, and say, you know what, this really killed me. And I maybe even lost it, you know, I yelled, and I feel really bad about it. But you need to talk it through, and you need to realize that you're human, and you're gonna do it differently the next time, and move forward. But it is really important to sort that out, truly. Going forward with the behavioral cycle and realizing that there are some sorts of things that you can do around these behaviors, like planned ignoring. However, not always easy. So you're gonna plan this ignoring of your child, right? Who's biting somebody or throwing something, and your mother-in-law is there saying, wait a minute, how do you ignore this? Why are you ignoring this behavior? Not always easy, but you can explain it's a strategy that we have to use consistently. What if you redirect your child to something that's preferred and it looks like you're just giving in to your child all the time? Sometimes we have to do that. How about the screaming behavior is so loud that neighbors, and I've had this happen, neighbors actually call in our Department of Human Services thinking somebody's being abused or something's happening in the home next door because there's so much screaming going on from the child. So just awareness, you may in fact have been through something like this. Self-abused, when they're hyper-aroused and they're biting themselves, hitting their heads, that's really hard for people to see, isn't it? So again, just having that strategy in place and being able to say, you know, I've got this, we're working on a strategy, I don't like it either, but we're gonna go forward. And I think that's all you have to say in those situations. Remember that the consequence sometimes maintains the behavior. So we've always been really concerned about the antecedent. Well, now we're flipping the model and saying, you could actually be reinforcing this behavior. So remember our little scheme that we had planned before? The way you respond, that is the consequence in essence. The way you respond, what you do as a result of the behavior can maintain it. So again, if you give in at the grocery store and your child is having a tantrum and you decide, okay, just this one time I'm going to buy something, right? Every time you go, he's going to expect that response. So once again, that consequence that you've given him, in other words, he cries and you give something to keep him quiet, that reinforces that behavior, doesn't it? It's not helping with that behavior, it's reinforcing it. So again, we have to really pay attention to that. So the consequence, again, can in fact be an issue. And some of these are just written out for you so that you have the takeaway to what I'm just saying to you. So just again, to have something there that you can sort of go back to. One of the ways too to reinforce difficult eating habits is not to ask your child to try anything different. Cook separate meals for them and do things like that. What about staying home and the rest of the family goes forward because your child can't tolerate going out or going to a restaurant? Again, it won't work for a life skill. It just won't work. There are ways for you to modify that behavior for sure. Maybe you have a different car, your husband goes with the other kids, they order, and when the food arrives, just about at that point, you leave the house and you're there for that. If it's particularly noisy, I've had people do a takeout. They just bring it home, and that's okay. But I think just making that attempt to include your child with Fragile X or your children with Fragile X in a family activity is critical. You can step that back, you can do it in pieces, you can do whatever it takes and how much they can tolerate, but it's really important not to change your whole life for the child with Fragile X. How about parents and teachers? I think it's important, teachers, carers here, who also feel the impact of, I'm trying really hard to meet the needs of this child, and he just doesn't seem to want to learn, or he gets really mad at me if I push him at different times during the lesson. It's really important for you also to kind of deal with those behavioral issues and how that makes you feel as a teacher. There are a lot of different things that have gone on in terms of ways that you can kind of understand that child with Fragile X, really critical. I think just looking at that anxiety role and being aware that that's a big player. And he doesn't want not to learn, he is anxious. And so cutting that down to the little pieces is really critical. We can't be available for instruction unless we're kind of calm and ready to learn, right? And so if you're anxious and hyper-aroused, you're not going to be available for instruction. It doesn't matter if you were named the Teacher of the Year last year. Here's some things to do at home. A comfortable place for them to be with lots of structure. Visual schedules are important. We've talked about that a lot. Secure places in your home for the sensory breaks. You don't have to have a sensory lab. You don't have to change your whole home around for this child. But I think it's important to have those spots, those places where you know that he can access those sensory tools that are helpful to him. Workstations, I like this one because it's really important for your child to know that he's a member of your family and he needs to be engaged in some sort of work, meaning a chore, meaning a contribution to the family. If it's nothing more than getting the silverware out, the cutlery out, and putting it where it belongs. If it's nothing more than taking a bag or a basket of clothing that's been washed into the bedroom, something like that to let him know that's his job and it will be on his schedule, just as it is for the other children. I really like the idea of limiting screens. It's really hard to do because that's an built-in babysitter. It does help kind of take the pressure off when you're in a situation where you have to entertain your child. But some of our kids now are getting so addicted to those screens that they really can't interrupt that. And I have a student in a program in Alabama, which is one of our southern states, who has been on the screen almost all the time, gets up in the middle of the night, logs in, does all kinds of things. And this has caused some major issues. Transitioning him from a computer activity to anything else in the classroom is almost impossible. So again, we've stripped it completely out and we're not using any screens with him at school. We may introduce something gradually, but at this point in time, it really has set him up to fail and we don't want to do that. Having little small jobs, really great. This guy with Fragile X has a little job that he can come around. Yesterday I saw a little guy driving a tractor, his small tractor after his dad's tractor. It was really a nice thing to see, just contributing in that way. Making sure that your children have independence. This is critical. You can find capabilities that they have, and I know you know what they are. All of them have sort of certain little quirky things or things that they like to do or they're good at. Capitalize on that. Because your child is going to need something like that to be the anchor, to be the bridge to something more appropriate in life to make him more independent. So again, just having those things in mind, encouraging those things, fostering relationships outside the family. I actually have Special Olympics up here, and I know you have someone from Special Olympics. Volunteering, anything like that is really important. There's an important piece too to having them integrate into the general public and also having them be independent. And that's really encouraging them to groom properly, to look nice, to have that personal hygiene intact. The age-appropriate dress, even though they may be developmentally delayed, that's one thing that doesn't always go over really well. And I had an adult bring in her Care Bear and she was 30 years old, and she carries it around everywhere she goes. We've now got to a point where it's small. A small one can fit in her purse. It's okay. I get it. It's a security blanket. But if we see her carrying in the large Care Bear, we don't know that she actually has a pretty high IQ for girls with full mutation. We would think of her as less able. We would think of her as not as independent, just based on what we see. So again, let's really take a look at that. Involving your kids in different activities that make them sort of more normalized is critical. These guys have enjoyed some things, dramatic things, and also cheerleading. We know that these activities, we did a survey quite a while ago with the National Fragile X Foundation, and these were some of the activities that were most successful. Again, a lot of these have to do with just some sporting things, also just music. That's a big deal, isn't it? So again, those are important. Just kind of the same thing that Jonathan touched on, just asking, have you prepared? Have you made a plan for your child as they get older? And unfortunately, we're not all going to live to be 2,000 years old, and all of us will, in fact, be leaving this earth at some point in time. What's the preparation for that? And have you addressed that? So again, that's a really important thing. Will they live independently? Will they live with family? Have you provided for that particular environment? Do you have the siblings on board for that? Or is there somebody else that, you're going to move them out into a group home? How is that going to look? It's an unpleasant thing to talk about, and I understand that, but we really have to do that. We have to look forward to those times so that if that does happen, you've got a plan. Here's our options for independent living. You can see that sometimes completely independent, sometimes there's a shared living environment, sometimes solo living environment with just somebody that kind of checks in periodically, communal living like Kyle is doing, group home where members can vary and everybody can kind of have their own task or their own level with an adult checking in to make sure everything is okay. Sometimes we do the residential or assisted living with a larger number of individuals that have disabilities. There's always the state institutions, which is one thing that we all try to avoid at all costs. I have an individual that's coming to me right now who will turn 69, maybe he just turned 69. It's the oldest individual with a full mutation that I've ever treated. His story is a very difficult one in that he was, in fact, institutionalized for quite a while. And eventually he got out of the institution. His parents had both died, and so there really was no one else. His brother had died, his sister was in Seattle. And so she took over guardianship and she started fighting really hard to get him out of the institution. She was successful at that. He is a Colorado person. He's been there his whole life. And so she looked into what we call host homes in the U.S. A really nice family sort of adopted him per se. And of course they get the support from all of the Social Security. But this couple has just done a wonderful job with him. And this guy has just begun to blossom. He's been with them for about 3 years. He's a different individual. His sister, unfortunately, also had cancer and has passed away, but before she died, she was able to really see him happy and in an environment where he was cared for. And that, I think, is so important for us to listen to and to really know about, because there are those places, and she could not have him with her. She was working, it was impossible. So again, just having those families that makes it, in my opinion, kids with Fragile X, Kyle loves the environment where he lives, but I think sometimes they need a family. I think they need to understand that this is sort of now my new family, and I'll be cared for, and I do all these other things with this family. They have a large extended family. They've now moved him into a home that they actually built, that their daughter can also be a part of, so that they can get some respite time and she can be paid to do the respite care. She's all been certified, and so it works out really, really well for them, and he's so happy. It's just a wonderful, wonderful story. Just quickly, the world of work, same kind of thing. These kids do grow up, and we find that there are things that they need to be able to do and live independently. Here's some of the things that have worked out fairly well for us. with the boys. Again, Tim serves the juice at the nursing home, at the skilled nursing facility. They love him. He's very social, loves taking in the juice and greeting everybody. Sometimes the Humane Society, the girls oftentimes like animals, guys do too. Again, really important pro-social behavior, extremely important for you to teach these things. What's the appropriate place to do this? We have the Social Compass program that matches up private and public. Again, begin early. You can't start teaching this too soon. Changing in from your pajamas into your street clothes in the living room watching TV at 18 is not cool. We really, I mean, it's totally inappropriate.